Studies have shown over and over again that most relational and psychological problems are best solved within a caring community. And I would suggest that there's no better place on the planet to have your relational needs, psychological needs, mental health needs, spiritual needs met than the Church of Jesus Christ. I think this is really what God ultimately designed the church for, so that we can actually carry one another's burdens, so that we can be there for one another, to help one another in times of need. When it comes to issues of relational, spiritual, mental health, even in financially, we see the book of Acts in Acts chapter 2 that the early believers, and I know that we don't always live like this, but they sold all their possessions, it says, and gave to one another as there was need. And so we read Acts chapter 2, the beginning of the early church, and we say, boy, we're so far removed from that, and maybe there's glimpses of it in the churches that you attend and that I attend, and hopefully there is, and I think there is, at least in my church, but we're not there yet. And maybe you've experienced some other opposite things in church where you've been hurt or betrayed or feel like you've been abused by leadership. And if that's you, I'm really sorry to hear that. But the reality is, if you've been in church for long enough, I would say also join the club, because here's the reality. When you're in any kind of relationship for a long enough period of time, you will experience hurt and disappointment. That's just inevitable. If you've been married for a long period of time, 20, 30, 40 years, you've been hurt and you have hurt the other person. But of course, the way of the gospel is to forgive, to receive forgiveness, and to extend forgiveness. And this is, of course, what we're to do. And of course, move on. Never stay in an abusive church or in a church where, they're doing ungodly things. But sometimes we feel so far removed from the book of Acts, the church in the book of Acts. But, I was reading a few years ago that the giant redwood trees of Northern California, maybe you've been there. I haven't. I want to go there someday really bad. I hope to. But some of these redwood trees are over 350 feet tall. And some of them are over 2,000 years old. Of course, you'd have to be pretty old to reach those heights, I would suggest. But, the thing about those trees, and maybe you've read this before or seen this before, but it shocked me to learn that their roots don't go down very deep. For such tall trees, reaching hundreds of feet tall, their roots sometimes only go down 5-6 feet deep. And these are for some of the tall trees, less than 10 feet. And that's crazy to me, because how could such a tall thing stand in the midst of weather, storms, and I mean, it's in California, maybe earthquakes, I don't know. How could trees reach such heights with such shallow roots? Well, how they do it is all the roots of all these trees under the ground are all intermingled, intertwined. They're wrapped around each other. They're strengthening one another. They're receiving nutrients from one another. And it forms this system underneath the ground where this bedrock of strength is formed so that they can reach the heights that they're reaching. And, it's kind of like that with our faith as well. Now, we do know the Bible teaches us that our roots need to go down deep into Jesus Christ. Absolutely, it does. But, we can only deepen those roots so much before we really need to start intertwining those roots with other believers in a caring church community. And if we're going to reach the heights that we're meant to reach as believers, and there are things that you are called and created for by God to do in this lifetime, and if we're ever going to do it, if we're ever going to reach our potential in the Lord, it can only be done in the context of being a part of a caring, biblical, authentic community. All right. Jesus said in John 10:10 that he came to give abundant life. Right? Abundant life. And I would suggest that the abundance isn't just in eternity, in the abundance of length of time, but it's also in the time we have here on earth, that it's going to be meaningful, purposeful. There's something more about it, but I don't think it can be done outside of community. I don't think it can be done if you just isolate yourself. Why? Because the person who isolates themselves, who doesn't have that community, it's all about themselves, right? And that's really a miserable existence, I would say. I've said it many times that some of the most miserable people, and this sounds kind of harsh, but the most miserable people I've ever met are always, quite often, the ones who never lift a finger to help anyone else. And the most joyful people I know are also the most generous with their time, their energies, their skills, their monies. So I think there is a little bit of a correlation there oftentimes. Proverbs 18:1 says, "A man who isolates himself seeks his own desire and rages against all wise judgment." That's a harsh scripture. So we're not to isolate ourselves. We're to be a part of a authentic biblical community. If you're not part of one, find one, drive to one. do some research, get online, ask around, be a part of one. If you've been let down by a church or hurt in the process somewhere along the way, I'm sorry to hear that, but welcome to the club. A lot of us have been, because guess what? The church are full of human beings. They will always let you down. God won't. Keep moving on. Find another church. Plug back in, and God will help you to become all that He's called and created you to become.